So far this year, as we've been learning about physical science, we've been really focused on just one major concept in physical science: matter. After all, matter is the main thing that makes up all stuff in God's created universe. So we started by learning about the characteristics and terms that describe matter. Then we learned about how matter can undergo physical and chemical changes. Most recently, we learned that there are different specific types of matter based on how the atoms are arranged. But scientists realize that just understanding matter doesn't give us a full understanding of everything that has been created for human beings in this universe. There's also another major concept that we have to understand in addition to matter, and that concept is energy. This lesson is our first step toward exploring that other side of the created universe, toward exploring energy. And there are 7 total forms of energy. In this lesson, we're going to be looking at 3 that are related to one specific thing. We're going to be looking at the 3 forms of energy that are related to the parts of an atom. These forms of energy are found in the parts of matter. All right, so I want you to just keep that in mind as we move forward with this brand new concept that we haven't really even started to explore yet this year. Now, as we get going learning about the atomic forms of energy, perhaps the best place to start is by defining energy and then defining what it means that energy is atomic in these cases. Energy's definition is the ability to cause a change. And when I say change, I mean any change you can imagine. A change in color, a change in shape, a change in the entire set of properties of a substance, a change in temperature. It could be an explosion, which is a whole bunch of changes happening at the same time. It could be movement. All of those changes are changes that take energy. Perhaps the easiest way for you to conceptualize a release of energy is to think about an explosion, because you're used to thinking in science class about explosions as releasing energy. So maybe for now, just kind of keep that idea in mind. One of the main ways that we see energy released at a lot of energy at the same time is during an explosion. So that could be one way you could picture energy. The word atomic has a root word that's very obvious, and that is the root word atom. Atomic simply means that whatever we're talking about has to do with atoms. Now, oftentimes when you think about atomic energy, it conjures up images of mushroom clouds, atomic bombs, nuclear reactors. But that's just one type of atomic energy. There are actually 2 other types of energy that have to do with the parts that make up an atom. And that's what we're going to be talking about today. When we combine these 2, we're going to look at changes that can happen or changes that are stored up in the parts that make up atoms. Now it's time for some visuals, because I keep talking about these parts that make up atoms, but I haven't shown you them yet. So let's bring in some atoms. This is actually a propane molecule made up of 3 carbon atoms bonded to 8 hydrogen atoms. But when I keep talking about these parts of atoms, in order to see those parts, we have to peel away the surface of the atom so you can see what's inside. Inside, we have the parts that make up atoms. We'll be talking about these parts a lot more later. I'm just going to say for now, you see protons, neutrons, and electrons inside the atom. The first part we're going to take a look at are some of those electrons, the blue little circles inside those atoms. And we're going to look particularly at the electrons that are caught up in between atoms that are holding atoms together. Whenever a pair of electrons holds atoms together, we call that one of the types of bonds. A bond is a connection between atoms, and sometimes those bonds are caused by electrons that are paired up holding atoms together. In fact, those bonds are always caused by electrons doing something. So those bonds are holding those atoms together, and because they're holding atoms together and it takes energy to break those bonds, and when new bonds are formed, a bunch of energy gets released. Because there's energy involved, we can define the type of energy that has to do with bonds as chemical energy. Chemical energy is energy that's stored in the bonds of atoms that can be released by a chemical reaction. Think about if we were to burn this propane. Would that release energy and cause a whole bunch of changes? Absolutely. So energy can be stored in the bonds between atoms. Another place that energy can be stored is in the center of an atom, which is known as the nucleus. The nucleus is just where all the mass of an atom is located, concentrated at the center. The energy that's stored there is known as nuclear energy. And it is quite a bit of energy in each atom for the amount of energy total that an atom has. Now, for a big nuclear reaction to occur, you actually need to break down and split apart millions and millions of atoms. It's not just one atom being split that causes a big nuclear explosion, but there is quite a bit of energy stored in the nucleus of an atom compared to an atom size. However, the atoms in propane are all really small atoms. They're carbon and hydrogen. And small atoms are generally very stable, and their nucleus doesn't break apart very easily. So for us to be able to see an atom that actually would break apart and release its nuclear energy, we have to look at a larger atom like this one, technetium, which is an atom on the periodic table that is radioactive. And when we look at the inside, you see that its nucleus is much bigger, much less stable, and is much more easily able to break apart and release the energy holding it together. So, now you've learned about two atomic forms of energy, one stored in the bonds between atoms and one stored in the nucleus. But there is a third type of atomic form of energy that's stored in the parts of an atom. And actually, this part is just stored in individual electrons, the tiny negatively charged particles of an atom that surround the nucleus, that are outside of the nucleus. When those electrons move from one place to another, they have the ability to cause change as electricity. And think of all the changes that you've seen electricity cause. Right now, you're able to hear and see me because electricity is being changed into sound and light in your computer. Now again, this propane molecule is not the best example of a type of molecule that's able to conduct electricity. So we actually have to look at a different substance in order for us to see electrical energy, because those electrons need to be able to move through an electric potential. Like if we were to connect a battery, the electrons would have to be able to flow. These electrons are tied up in bonds. They can't flow from one place to another. So let's look at some electrons that can flow from one place to another. Here I have a sample of iron. Iron's atoms are all arranged in this crystal lattice, but outside, far away from the nucleus of the atom, there's just all these electrons in metals that are able to freely move around between atom and atom. They're not tied down to any specific atom. Now, if we were to look inside of these iron atoms, you would see there are a lot of electrons that are stuck near the nucleus, but some of them get to wander. Some of them are far enough away that they're not really being held onto anymore. And when we apply an electric potential to either side of this substance, we see that the electrons are then able to move easily from one place to another. And because they're able to flow from one place to another, we have electrical energy moving, the flow of electrons. All right, so far we have seen three different forms of energy that tie themselves up inside an atom. There's energy stored in the bonds between atoms, that's chemical, energy stored in the nucleus, that's nuclear, and energy that's found in moving electrons through an electric potential, that's electrical energy, all able to cause changes when that energy is released.